I'm the only one at home, so I don't know what's going on.
Hi, Megan here from Romance by the Book with the lovely Marielle.
Hello.
And this is January, and we have Erin Langston here. Hello.
Hi, everybody.
She wrote our book of the month, Forever Your Rogue, which we loved, and we're very excited to talk about.
Yeah, we were just saying offline how at the very end of 2024 there was a big outpouring of love for historical romance, and we are happy to see it. So we get to talk about your book, which is definitely historical times. I think I used to listen to Heaving Bosoms, and they would call it like England times.
England Times, yeah.
And
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. So I guess my first question is about Cora. Um, did you always know that she was going to be a mom? Like, was that always part of her character, or did you have the storyline somewhat and then she kind of popped in? How did that go for you?
Yeah, so I had Cora first. I had Cora for a long time, before I even thought I would write, like committed to the idea of writing a book. Like I kind of had this character and I was like, that's who I would write a book about if I were ever going to write a book. I sometimes explain it to people like, it's not like I was like, I want to be a writer. What should I write about? It was more like, I have something to write about. I guess I could be a writer, right? So it was like it was kind of that sort of framing for me. So I had this like this visual in my head for a long time. Like the first kind of image I had of Cora was a young woman like standing at the bottom of the stairs, like listening up to the nursery, right? Like that image in the prologue kind of her, like she gets this catastrophic, life-changing news that she's a widow now, and she like goes to like listen to see if the kids are asleep. And like that was kind of just in my head, right? Like of that was like this character sort of came to me that way. So I didn't really have like a plot for
I
her
didn't
for
want to
like a
interrupt
while.
you, but when you had that first image, did you know that what the news was, or you just had her like
Uh,
listening?
I knew yeah, I thought it was like that her husband died. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. But I didn't really have anything else. Like I didn't know any other like circumstances around like what was going to happen in the book. But I kind of carried that with me and then I'd like visit like, I would daydream about her and then I would be like, well, then I would start daydreaming about like Nate. Like, oh, who's like a guy for her, right? Like, so that was fun, but yeah, there was no plot for like a long time. But once I was kind of doing research for something else, I'm a research librarian. So I was like going down some rabbit hole or another, and I came across like these custody laws, and these lawsuits that I talk about a little bit in the author's note,
Yeah.
the Demaniville case specifically. And it was like a lightning strike. I don't even know how else to explain it. And I was like, that's what it would be. Like, that's the storyline. Like these custody, it was appalling to find out how, like, I mean, I guess I knew how few rights women had in their marriage. Like, I knew about coverture. I knew about how the husband, assumes the legal identity of his wife, like, or, absorbs it, I guess. I didn't think about that in terms of what that meant for the children of that union. And so once I really started thinking about that, it seemed like a really interesting and compelling angle for the story. Um, so I knew, so that's kind of when like the plotting happened. But I'll say, I mean, writing a mom character with kids on the page
Yeah.
as often as they are was like not easy. That was like, I still remember talking to somebody in the early days of this drafting process, and she was like, yeah, it's a great idea, but nobody likes kids in books. And I was like, well, some people do. But I was also like, no, I get it, right? Like, I'm going to have to really think about this. But the problem I kept having was that if I'm going to have her stakes be this, right?
Yeah.
If it's going to be that she's going to lose her kids, we have to feel that with her. Like, I can't just reference the kids and like we never see them.
And they're like up in the attic.
Right.
Right. Right. I mean, it's like we have to see her with them. We have to see. Nate with them. We have to like give them personalities so that like we're invested in the kids as side character, like proper side characters.
Hmm.
Um, and so that was kind of that was one of the trickier things about writing her as a mom was knowing that I was going to have to build out the family,
Yeah.
and do it in such a way that it was enough, but like not, trying to find some balance if I could. Um, and the second challenge that I ran into with Cora was challenging. I love her, but she was hard to write. Um, is if I have given her these stakes and I've made like put her kids on the line, all of her, if this is what she's thinking about all the time, how am I going to plausibly move her into a romance arc? Like who, like, what's she gonna do? Just be like falling into bed like with Nate and like her kids are about to be taken away. I was like, I have to also figure out a way to move through that and make that kind of a plausible. Um, it took a while. It kind of took a while to crack her and figure out like,
People are so hard on moms too. I feel like that if you have somebody, like I think people are very often, especially like with dark romances or contemporary, where people just like, have a casual encounter or fall into a situationship or whatever. It's believable, relatable, like, or just like it's hot and nobody like investigates too much. But I do think that when it's a mom and you've got the kids on the page, that it feels like that would be tricky to get the balance right so that it is like sexy and but also people aren't going like, oh, but her kids,
right.
or why
But her
isn't she
kids, yeah.
thinking
And
about
even
her
for
kids?
me, like for me, I wanted her to feel authentic. Like, so it's like
Mhm.
I know her interior so well by now that like she's not going to easily like let go of this particular anxiety. But I think
Or
that's
she's a worry ward too. It's not like
Yeah.
she's somebody who just like throws her
Like, oh, it'll
worries.
work out. No.
right, exactly. And I think that's kind of what I had to get to in the drafting process and like the with her character arc was just letting that be what happens. Like she's in an intimate scene with Nate in the library and
Yeah.
like she literally says to him like I can't I can't ever let go of this worry. Like even when we're together, like I'm worrying about it, or and then the other part I kind of let come through for her. Part of her arc is realizing this tension between I've devoted my whole life to my kids, but that's not giving me a whole life, and she has a discussion with him when they're sitting at the piano where she kind of admits like I tell everybody the kids are enough for me, but like they're just like they're almost enough for me,
Yeah.
you know? And I was like, so I'm just gonna let her acknowledge, like, just like what you said, that it's hard for moms, but like she kind of is vulnerable with him to say, like, I am a mom, but I'm a woman also.
Mhm.
And it's hard. It's hard to balance all that. And so
Yeah.
part of the way he steps up for her is kind of acknowledging, like, no, I see all of that. That's okay. Like you can be all of those things with me,
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah,
So
and I
it's
had I
hard.
had a question about Nate actually, because in the story he from the beginning is kind of like chafing at his brother's expectations or like what he views as his brother's expectations maybe.
Yeah.
Um, but Cora is so determined to be like self-contained and self-sufficient, and she does not like asking for help. And she is very clear that she does not expect anything from him. And I think that that combination, like it taking away anything that he could rub up against, made him really have to like investigate who he wanted to be as a person and like you know if he was the man that he wanted to be the way currently, which I thought was really interesting and an interesting take on like the romance rake, who of course we all love. But what inspired you to take that kind of an angle, I guess, on that character?
Yeah. So it's interesting because I was devoting a lot of like my character work on the early side to Cora for all the reasons I just said. And I kind of thought originally like Nate would, I don't know, he surprised me. Like the character really surprised me of like just how much he kept asking for in a way. Like I was like, okay, like I'll give you more, I'll give you, But really, I think the question that I kept coming back to with Nate is, you know, I didn't necessarily set out to write any type of archetype. I mean, I know we fall into those patterns, but I wasn't really trying to write, the debonair rake. I wasn't really trying to write the guy who's sworn off love or like the brooding, like I kind of, I just was trying to write like a 27-year-old guy, right? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and so what I wanted to kind of explore with him
Is like muddling, they're just muddling through.
Muddling through,
It's
yeah.
for better, for worse. Like, right. And so I kind of wanted to the question I kept coming back to with him was how can you make somebody grow up, or like, how do you reform a rogue or redeem a rake or whatever you want to call it without it only being the love of a woman, right? Like, usually, and again, like these tropes are beloved for a reason, but like usually you fall in love with the right woman and the man like steps up and like changes himself. And that
Mhm.
happens in this book. But I wanted it to be a little bit more than just his relationship with Cora that he has to grapple with. And so that's kind of why the stuff with Raymond came in and the stuff with the kids came in, because I just sort of wanted him to be confronted in this like 360 kind of view of all the ways that he has pigeonholed himself into like a certain kind of like character. Like he kind of feels like this is, who I'm supposed to be. I'm just supposed to be this
Right.
one way. And then he's sort of confronted with like maybe I don't have to be. Um, and I do think you hit the nail on the head that there's something about the fact that Cora is willing to see him. And I know you guys did have a question about like their past kind of relationship. So this I can talk about that more, but I think he's kind of confronted with this idea of like Cora still sees him like exactly the way that he was when he was 22 years old, right? When he was getting like beat up and was drunk all the time because he is that way still, but
Yeah.
but
He did
he
show
is
up to her house kind of roughed up and
right. Like there's a
Freshly
reason he
messed.
sees him
Yeah.
that way, right? Um, but I think it kind of bothers him because he assumes at first that she's also the same way that she always has been. And then he's quickly like, no, she's not. Like a lot has changed. And so I think that's part of what's going on as well. And then, he and his brother sort of are they're doing it to each other, right? Like the same kind of Nate only wants to see Raymond as this one way, like the hard ass who's been like riding his ass like his whole life, like, being the mean dad because his actual dad was really hands off and not doing anything. Like, and Raymond only wants to see Nate as this screw up, like, and they kind of have to grapple with the fact of like, just because they have opposing personalities doesn't mean that they can't see the best in each other or have, a quality relationship,
Yeah.
and
do
I
you
think
think that
there's
it's like hard to get out of like, and it's not a rut, but like once you establish a relationship a particular way, I think that it's can be hard to get out of that. And I feel that way with like moms too. I think that sometimes it's hard to like when kids like I will say this for like in my own family, there are some moms that were like amazing mothers to very small children. But when they start like having opinions and autonomy and like the ability to do things, it's like,
right,
because
right.
there's a
Yeah,
shift. And I think and I felt like with Raymond that he just didn't, he was like stuck into like, my brother is a teenager and I need to rein him
right.
in. And his brother was like full grown and
Yeah.
had good ideas sometimes. I mean, not always, but sometimes.
They have this moment where like the veil kind of lifts and like Raymond admits, okay, you are a carefree person. You are like a fun-loving person. That's okay. Like some people are just like that. Like some people are just not burdened. Like Nate's not a burdened person. Like he's just, but he helps other people shoulder theirs because he's got good humor about it. Um, and like you said, these family relationships kind of calcify a little bit. Like you get even with Tabby, who loves Nate, she still is kind of like, like he's gonna go off and do his own
Right, like, oh,
thing.
he does this, he runs
Right.
off for 4 days and doesn't tell anybody where he is.
Right.
Yeah.
But we love him for it, like that
Yeah.
kind of it. So, and the same time, Nate only sees Raymond as this parental figure that he really had chafed against until he has this moment with Leo and he realizes like, wait, my brother did this exact same thing. Like when he was my age, he took us on and he didn't have to do that. And wow, like that's quite a thing that
Right.
he was willing to do that. So it was important to me that those familial relationships kind of helped push Nate's arc, not only Cora, and but they have to play off of each other. And that's kind of what you picked up on, Marielle, is like when
Yeah.
with your question, is like Cora doesn't ask anything, and that's when Nate's kind of like, well, maybe you should. Like somebody should ask something of me. Like,
Yeah.
um,
He's
and
like, should
Yeah.
I be offended though? Like when
Right. Should I be
it's
offended that she
like
doesn't
she's
expect that I can do anything? Yeah.
right, right. And I do kind of love that even though he does grow up a lot, obviously in a lot of ways, he stays like himself too, and he still kind of has that real carefree sort of like fun loving nature even as
Yeah.
he grows up in personality and in age. um Nate and Cora appear briefly in my latest release that just came out this fall, but that book is like 30 years, like it's second generation. And
Yeah.
so we see them briefly and they're still like, he's still like, oh, well, like, what's the gossip, guys? Like, what's going on? It's like still like he's still Nate, but he's like the Earl and he's like in his 50s. And, it was kind of fun
That's
to
awesome.
peek at him again. So, yeah.
I love that.
I thought
So,
they made for a really good like match though because of that. Because Cora was like a worry with like underneath fun, loving under all the worry, but Nate can be fun and then have his worries be like under the surface. It's like they
yeah.
brought
Right.
out
Exactly.
they balance each other out, which was fun.
And I don't want to interrupt you,
Oh, no,
Megan.
you're
I was
fine.
going to say, I didn't realize it till after I had written the book, but I was watching a rerun of Friends, and there's a moment when Chandler and Monica are talking or something, and he's like, "You are high maintenance, but I like maintaining you." And I was like, "Oh, wait, that's like the dynamic, right? Like that's what we're." A couple of people pointed out to me since, but I really like that because I'm like, yeah, that's the vibe, right? Like,
Yes, for sure. He likes being responsible for the happiness of his family, which is awesome.
yeah.
Um, so we get this isn't a second chance romance, even though they did know each other before. It's more of a misconnection thing, which is like what Marielle was saying offline. And so I was curious if there was ever any incarnation of the story where we got more about them from before.
And can you send us the pages? No, I'm
Right.
kidding.
Well, no, so this is really funny. I have them. I have a scene. I had a full, like, partial chapter, several pages of the night Cora finds him in his brother's study. That,
Mhm.
like, the night where he is really in trouble and she offers to give him her family's jewelry and get him out of debt and, like, curries that favor with him. And so I wrote the whole thing out. I mean, it was like a flashback, but it was in real time. It wasn't in their memories the way it ended up being in the book.
Mhm.
I just didn't really end up having like a place for it. Like I was like, this is sort of detracting from like the momentum at this point, so I had to cut it, and I kind of realized what was more important than the reader like seeing it in real time was seeing their like memories of it and how they like remembered each other and think of each other and how that kind of plays into their current dynamic.
Mhm.
So yes, I did have it in real time of like, her finding him, and then she's like putting his head in her lap and she's worried, but she's also like, oh my God, like you're out of control,
Yeah.
and yeah, I think misconnection is the perfect word for it because they weren't like ready for each other at that time.
Yeah.
Um, but there's definitely this sense of like, yeah, there's like something kind of flirty there. I think they were always like, I think, attracted to each other. But Cora's was kind of probably colored with, yes, he's like handsome and flirty, but like he's no good.
He's a
Like,
mess.
and
Yeah.
I'm a good girl. Like,
Yeah. I'm gonna do
like
what I'm supposed to do. Yeah.
The
Yeah,
historical romances that say like he's not for you, I feel like that was
Yeah.
probably her like, ooh, but he's not for me.
Yeah.
right. He's like not for like really anybody like at this point, and
Yeah.
and
A couple of
he's
people in the book that say that he like would be good with kids, but not a good husband. And I'm
Yeah.
like,
yeah,
oh,
yeah, he just is like so like irresponsible. Yeah, he's just a mess. He's a mess.
Yeah.
Um, and like, yeah, and I think for him, it's very much the whole like, oh, I like getting under her skin. Like she likes to act put upon. I think she's kind of faking it, but not totally. And sort of a vibe. But yeah, he doesn't want to like, I don't know, um, so I do have, yeah, I did actually write it all out, but there just wasn't like a place for it. I always thought it would be kind of fun also. I never wrote this, but I kind of daydreamed about it a little bit of like some ball scene that first season for her where like she and like Tabby are there, maybe like Nate shows up and they're all kind of hanging out and like they're maybe doing their flirty kind of bantering thing. And then her like fiance comes and so she has to like go like with Dane and then Nate's kind of like, oh that. So I don't know.
mm,
I always thought that would be kind of fun too. I imagine
yeah.
there's like a vibe there, like a semi like, oh, we're into each other, but it's not gonna happen. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's like, and then looking back on it, it's like, oh, that could have been something, but it never was.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
They're so fun. I love them together so much.
And I think too, one thing I do think about that, like with the misconnection and stuff too, it's interesting because I did wonder as I was writing the book, was Nate going to have any kind of like overt jealousy about her first marriage? And, it doesn't quite end up playing out that way. Like I wondered if he would. And I think he really just kind of does accept that that's the way things did have to play out.
Mhm.
And that, he does have this kind of thought of like, oh, you all should have been mine. But it's not like, it's not really like in anger or jealousy. It's more of just like protectiveness
Yeah,
and
like he missed it. He feels like he missed it and he hates that. Yeah.
yeah,
And Leo has that moment where he's kind of like, do you think I'm going to be like my dad? And he like, so I think Nate feels very protective of this family and this kind of like that this like the dad they had before didn't really
He's
care
not,
for them or treasure them the way
uh,
that he felt they should have been.
yeah.
yeah, exactly.
I also had a question, I guess, about your things that didn't make it into the book. I read your author's note with glee because I also love research. And I saw that, I mean, it was really clear that you did a lot of research to create those believable stakes and have obstacles that would have been like really appropriate for the period and everything. Was there any information that you loved but was just not going to make it into the book?
Yeah, I was thinking about that. And I think no. I think once I kind of landed on this plot line, I sort of focused all my research around things that were going to like bolster that. And then just kind of make sure I was fleshing out the legal pieces as much as possible. I didn't necessarily find any like nuggets that I just couldn't fit into this one. What I did kind of get from this process, though, was like learning that this is how I like to develop my plots in terms of like doing the research for the real world, like context and stakes. And that is something I have mirrored in the books I've written since Forever Your Rogue. So like Gavin's story is Some Winter's Evening. It's a novella that like follows this one. And it has a lot about like kind of the legal, like the trajectory of like the legal career of a young barrister. There's a lot about like the life of a governess and like restrictions on women and things like that. So that all made its way into that book. And then my latest release, The Finest Print, has probably the most research I've done. And that is all on like the early Victorian publishing industry, so news and penny dreadfuls and things like that. So I did learn from this book that what interests me the most are like those real kind of stakes. And so that is something I kind of have been like mimicking ever since, in terms of process. So Yeah,
Nice.
but I do love that. I do love a good author's note. So
You gave me one, so
Yes,
thanks.
that was great. Um, I wanted to ask, just sort of popped in because you were talking about the author's note, and it made me think about the epilogue, which I love an epilogue. I'm famous for living it, and I I was so intrigued by how you wrote this one so far in the future, and how you almost didn't notice that at first until like the grown kids come in and you're like, oh, it's 20 years later or whatever. So,
yeah.
um, was that something you just like felt like needed to get out? Did you consider doing it like closer to when they were having more kids or anything like that?
So interestingly, the epilogue for Rogue was the first thing I wrote for that book. So
Oh,
I
wow.
wrote that first before I went back and I wrote anything else, like in terms of when I was really actually drafting it. Um, and it's because I really, really wanted to like have this guidepost for myself of like what we're getting to, like where we're going and where we're headed, and like the people that they become and the family that they become. And it just made me feel really happy and content to like see them that way. And so I would just kind of go back and like revisit it if I got stuck in the draft. I'd be like, okay, like that's where we're going. And it like got tweaked, of course, like by the time I actually got back to it, you know.
Hmm.
I didn't like it didn't stay exactly as I originally had it. But um I so that's one kind of like tidbit, I guess, about like the epilogue. The other but I think there was the reason that I was sort of compelled to set it in the future and not just like maybe when their own wedding was or when they had the other babies
Hmm.
was because like we really had seen for all those chapters Nate and Cora as a young family. Like that's really what they were. That's really, I mean, there was like stress and I'm like, all these things going on too. But like we saw them coming together, parenting the kids, like being a young, busy family. And so I didn't feel like just showing them a couple years later would really like add too much to that. I really kind of wanted to show what they created, like in their family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and I kind of, yeah, so that's sort of how that came into play. People do ask sometimes, like, oh, I really wanted to see more of them like young. So I can always like I always say like there is a bonus story that has them young, like, just a year after the book was written. And then Gavin's novella is like a year and a half or 2 years after Forever Your Rogue, and they're in that too. It takes place at their estate. So we see them all in their like little family chaos in that one as well. So they're you get
They're
around
around.
to, yeah. And then you have the epilogue and then the finest print where you can see like their grown family. So yeah, so they're in all different iterations of their lives.
Enjoyed that so long. I actually was very like I was kind of giddy when I realized that they were like still sneaking around
I
and
know that was
their
and
kids
like
are grown.
Leo and Tess are
Yeah.
like
Like,
seriously, like
again.
again, like can we just is no room safe in this house, you know?
No, learn to knock. No.
Yeah. Yeah, I like it too. I also, yeah, it's good. Like, they're still doing their Nate and Cora thing. So
Yeah.
like, rest
Feels
assured.
like an AGA to me when
Yeah,
you're like,
absolutely.
you know.
Yeah. And that's really what Cora kind of always like wanted, right? Like she just like, they're all together, they're all like kind of being bad and like she's just like, oh yeah, look at my drunk son, like,
Yeah.
it's younger. Like, no, just kidding.
Leaving some girl's room. I hope it's not this one particular girl.
Yeah, yeah, I'll deal with him later, kind of a thing. And
Yeah.
but it was also really important to me too, to show the progression of Nate and Tess's relationship. Because that's like a really special moment for me in the epilogue too, is that kind of, and that got added in like I didn't write that part originally, but that kind of conversation where she is like talking to her dad the night before she's going to get married and she's kind of like, oh, again, just like Nate had that realization with Raymond of like, oh, you didn't have to do this. Tess is like, yeah, like you
Should I have
really
thanked you?
should I have thanked you? Yeah. And
Oh
every
gosh,
parent
that
knows
made
you
me
don't need
cry. I might cry
Yeah.
again thinking about it right now.
Yeah. No, it's really because that's what you want, right? Like as a parent, you don't want them to think like why would they thank me, right? Like I mean, well actually I would like my kids to thank me sometimes for things, but not for like raising them, like you
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
So yeah, kind
Yeah,
of a
for
full
sure.
circle.
Oh my gosh, this book, so awesome. Thank you
Yeah.
so much.
Well, and the other thing I'll just say is like the first time we see Nate, he is doing everything in his power to get out of the Fordham House ballroom. Like, he can't stand family duty for 1 second. And the last time we see Nate in that book, he's in the Fordham House ballroom, like with his daughter at midnight dancing before her wedding. And I'm kind of like, look, we got you, like you
You made
got
it.
figured it out. You made it. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. So I guess we'll ask the questions we always ask everybody we talk to, and mine is, what is your favorite trope to read?
Yeah, so this is really tough because I am not really a trope-centric reader. Like I will try or read anything as long as like I'm invested in like the characters and the voice. Like I get, voice really like if I get sucked in. So I don't necessarily seek out like certain books just because of a trope. I do really enjoy like just the dynamics that come out of a grumpy sunshine or a like starchy chaos kind of a dynamic. I always
Yeah.
think that that's just is really fun. Um, I do love like a good caretaking kind of trope. I always sort of like that. But again, I really am just willing to kind of try anything. So, yeah. And I don't really seek to write specific tropes either. It's just kind of whatever ends up being. Usually after I've written the book, I'll have to go back and be like, okay, if I'm going to market this, like what tropes are in this book? Like, and then I
Nice
kind
I,
Friend's
I
Brother,
found
my
my
favorite.
kind of read everywhere, but I do find that there's some that I'm like, I don't know, I don't think I really like this, but actually it depends
right. It
because
depends.
like
Yeah.
with everything, it depends. Sometimes it's also um well, and I feel like tropes became like a big thing more recently too.
Yeah.
So maybe it depends when you started reading romance, like how much you think about the tropes before
Well,
you then.
right. Like we
Yeah.
wouldn't necessarily have known. I mean, some you can tell from like the book jacket, but like not always kind of like what's in. So now I know, we see the graphics everywhere where people will put the different tropes and things. And so I think it's easier now to figure out like what they are going to be. But yeah, but I never say never for anything. And I also don't just only pick stuff that is a certain trope. So yeah.
Yeah. My question is more about you as a writer. So if we were a fly on the wall when you're in the middle of your writing process, like what would we see?
Yeah, so I mean, if I'm actually sitting at my laptop, it would be like early morning before the house is up, or it would be like late at night after the kids are in bed already. I kind of have to fit writing into like the margins of my day. I don't have like a dedicated like writing space, so I might be at the kitchen table or I might be sitting on my bed or on the front porch or whatever. So, that's kind of like some of the vibe, it's just kind of squeezed in. But it's interesting because a lot of my actual like drafting process happens away from the computer. So
And
I usually like when I'm taking like I'll take a walk like and I'll kind of like compose a scene in my head while I'm walking or driving or like doing the dishes and it'll be like just soup to nuts like the whole scene like dialogue, characterization, like all of it. And then I guess it's like a kind of a weird quirk of my brain, I guess, because then I'll just kind of hold that until I can sit down and then I just type it all up. So it's like the second
you
when the
remember it
laptop,
all?
That's amazing.
yeah, it's weird. I don't know. I didn't realize it was odd till I was talking to other writers or like other people, and they're like, oh, the first time I
Amazing.
write something's at my laptop. And I'm like, okay, the laptop's like the second time I write it, like that's
I
when
think about things a lot, but I don't. In fact, when I was on a walk one time, I tried to dictate because I
I do
had
that too.
watched a thing with, well, maybe I need to try it again because when I did, my dictation did not understand, I don't think, all the things I was saying. So I came back and I was like, I'll just type this into my, and I was like, I don't know what this means. I don't know what these words are. Didn't know.
Yeah. I do leave I guess like I don't dic maybe what I don't quite dictate, I guess then, but I'll leave myself like voice notes and stuff like that, and then I'll just kind of so and then I can write it down later but yeah, even without doing that, I can I can usually pretty much remember like what I wanted when I go to write it again.
Really
Um
cool.
but
That's
my husband
amazing.
will laugh too because there's always like, those moments too. I'll be like in like the shower, isn't that like where we always do our best
Yeah.
thinking,
Yeah.
And so I'll be like in the shower and then I'll suddenly be like, pee. And then I'll be like, write this down. Like, when I'm like dictating something to him, he's like standing in the bathroom, like typing something up,
That's amazing.
um, but yeah, it's a very like kind of fluid in that way for me. I am very envious of writers who can like schedule out time to write, who can say like, Monday mornings I go to the coffee shop and I'm going to write for 2 hours. And then I'm going to put it away until like the next time that I write. I just have never really worked that way. So like once the story takes hold, it's kind of always going, going, going in my head. Like I'm always composing things in my head. I'm trying to write them down. I'm squeezing it in. A lot of it I do on my phone. Like I had a joke like on my bio at one point, maybe it's still there, but a lot of Forever Your Rogue was just written like in the preschool pickup line. Like I would just be like typing it in my car, like while I was like waiting for the car line so it does feel kind of all consuming and chaotic when I am like drafting something, but I love it. Drafting is my favorite part of the process.
Cool.
But it does take like a lot of headspace. So yeah.
That's
Nice.
amazing to picture it just like working itself away back there while you're like feeding your kids and doing your laundry and whatever,
Yeah.
and then you
It's
finally
kind
get
of like,
to.
yeah, cinematic. Like I'm seeing it play out kind of like a movie or something. And then I just have to capture it
That's
later.
awesome.
Yeah.
That's
Cool.
fascinating. I love getting to hear about that. Thank you.
Yeah. I think all writers have I love talking to other writers about their process too. I think it's really fascinating. So
Yeah,
we all have kind of our own,
definitely.
and there's a lot of overlap, but it is interesting. Like people's brains just are really
Different.
Yeah.
fascinating how people work. So yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you so
Thanks.
much. This was
Yeah.
such fun, and we really did love that book so much.
Yeah.
And so thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much for chatting with me. Thanks for reading it this month. And yeah, this was really fun. So I hope you all have a great weekend.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
you too.
Yes,
The
everybody out
end of the
there, have a
longest
great
week.
weekend, and we'll see you next month.
Bye.